ones that are. And then you have a Mr. Putin who really does want to reestablish Russia as the world power it once was when it was the Soviet Union, and is willing to take chances to do that. So he's a lot more volatile and a lot less of a program that he wants to stay on as opposed to taking advantage. I mean, when you think of it in 2019, or a few years ago, but in this period, in this decade, to have one European country, given their history and the horrible things that happened there just in the 20th century, to have a country invade another European country, Ukraine. I mean, it's just incredible that he would come up with that as something that made sense. And of course he denies it and all that, but the point is a lot more. But they do, in spite of the fact that their economy is in such rough shape and the fact that they're in kind of social collapse, the fact is they do have a very good military, and he does spend a great deal of money looking at our capability, as does China, looking at our capability and saying, you know, well, we could never build as many aircraft carriers and have that expertise, so let's build capability to kill their aircraft, to destroy their aircraft carriers. So they're not competing aircraft carrier to aircraft carrier, Navy ship to Navy ship. But the Russians do have a very, very good military. They're very good at cyber as well. All you have to do is read the Mueller report real quick to find out, again, whether you agree or disagree with this president and whatever your feelings are about the 2016 election, the fact is that the Russians attempted to, which they're doing now, attempted to influence our elections. The most precious thing probably we as Americans have is our, you know, in addition to our families, is our way of life, is our government. And they attempted to affect it in 2016, in 2020. The good news is, as I say, I think my predecessor at DHS was Jay Johnson, great guy. He tried very hard to get the states, as an example, to come in, lock into the DHS on a voluntary basis and allow DHS to help protect their election systems. He just started that, and then he left office. I continued that again. I wasn't there all that long, but the person who took over after me, Kirstjen Nielsen, Secretary Nielsen, was very successful in getting. And I think maybe when I left the White House, all 50 states were working with DHS on a voluntary basis, sharing information to protect the nets. But the Russians are in the nets, very much trying to affect the election. Now, whether they were able to affect it in the sense that their person won the election or whoever they happen to be backing in this, I don't know. But the fact is they're in there and they're trying. As we go down the line, another very, very volatile country, one that the U.S. military spends a great deal of time focused on because they are so volatile, is North Korea. The only reason the North Koreans, and that is a gulag country. I mean, everyone that lives in that country is in prison. It's a terrible story, time after time, when the people would escape, and President Trump had a number of them come to the White House and tell their stories about what it was like to live in their country. It's just horrific. But the point is, anyways, the only thing that makes North Korea the least bit relevant in the world is they do have nuclear weapons. And they do have an ability right now to deliver nuclear weapons by missile, you know, kind of locally. So certainly Japan is at threat, South Korea. But we have a lot of U.S. military people in Okinawa and other parts of Japan, and they are within easy range and easy delivery of a nuclear weapon. And of course, he has not tested a nuclear weapon. Some would argue he doesn't have to anymore, he's got some. But he hasn't tested a nuclear weapon in some time, and that's good. He also has not tested an ICBM that could reach our homeland. Now, the president has said he will not allow that to happen. But the point is, right now, he's kind of put things on hold, but he, in my view, will never give up his weapons. Because he, as a dictator, is only relevant if he has, to the world, on the world stage, if he has nuclear weapons. But it's, our partners there, the Japanese, as well as the South Koreans, you know, are closer to the problem, and they work that problem every day. And again, we absolutely have to have partners in the world, whether it's NATO, you know, real formal partners like NATO, or just friends that we have around the world, the Nigerians countries you never really hear too much about that are very, very closely allied with the United States on various issues. Terrorism is probably the best example I would give you. But in any event, the next country that bears watching, to say the least, is Iran. The president came in, felt as though the Iran agreement that was worked out under the Obama administration gave too much to Iran, didn't hold them accountable enough in terms of their research on nuclear weapons, and decided to leave the plan. Right now we know that they do not have a nuclear weapon. They do not have an ICBM. They do have missiles that can range locally all the way to certainly Israel as an example, Saudi Arabia. But they're a dangerous country in the sense that they have a number of more radical organizations. The intelligence services, as an example, inside Iran are kind of their own guys and gals, and they're the ones, I mean, we could have ships attacked in the Persian Gulf, and have had ships attacked in the Persian Gulf, or drones shot down, that kind of thing. In these more radical elements within the military, within the intelligence community in Iran, are doing that on their own. You know, it's kind of like the Taliban in a way. You know, we tend to think of the Taliban fighters as part of an organization like the U.S. Army or the U.S. military, and they're not. They're all doing their own thing. But, I mean, collectively, they're trying to kill people and destroy the government of Afghanistan, but there's no chain of command, if you will. Valley to valley, city to city, they're all on their own. That's why it's so hard to you know, when you're talking to the Taliban, which we were until last week, you know, who are the Taliban? Will the people that we're talking to have influence over the rank and file Taliban? You know what I mean? It's just, it's hard. But in any event, Iran is a country that has got internal radical elements that can't always be controlled by the government, which is somewhat radical, but certainly less radical than some of these organizations, some of these men and women that are deeper down inside. And if they do get nuclear weapons, I mean, the theory would be if they were to get nuclear weapons, then you would see a real arms race. The Saudis would get them. You know, who knows? Maybe even some of the UAE and that kind of thing. But the point is, we don't want. There's too many nuclear weapons in the world, anyways. I would tell you this, and I don't think the president would mind my saying. The one thing that drove him, you know, kind of crazy was why do we have these nuclear weapons? You know, why can't we get rid of them? Why can't we convince people that they don't need nuclear weapons? You know, and stop the proliferation. And the fact is, the genie's out of the bottle. It's never going to go back in. But countries like Iran ought not to be able to develop nuclear weapons. They don't need them. No one's going to attack them with nuclear weapons. But it is but elements again within that country are quite influential in how they do business and what they're going to do. Switch real quick to back to Russia just a little bit. Russia certainly does threaten or scare the daylights out of many people in Europe. I think the president is very right when he came in to say that NATO, I believe in NATO. I believe in partners. I believe in friends. They help us in so many ways. You know, NATO, of course, is the most successful military political alliance in the history of the world. It has prevented a war in Europe since 1945. But where we, the United States, have lived up to our commitment and spend a huge amount of money so that we can defend NATO, Europe, so that we can defend South Korea, so that we can defend Japan and other places. A lot of our partners don't, and certainly when the president came in and looked at the 29 countries of NATO and said, okay, what's the commitment for them in terms of spending on their own defense? And the commitment is 2%. Okay, how many of them live up to the commitment? And I think like one at the time. And there are some very wealthy countries in NATO. It is the front line in terms of deterrence against any action by the Russians. But the fact is, he has been very vocal and very successful in getting the countries there to come up with plans to, if they're not at 2%, to get to 2% and to stay at 2% in terms of their military spending to defend themselves. And let me just switch finally to terrorism. Terrorism is with us, we know, I mean, this is 18 years ago. Terrorism is with us, it's with the world for the next number of generations. It's not going away. It's an ideology. It's an ideology that I think if you were from the Middle Ages, you might understand the ideology, but certain modern men and women don't understand it. It's as dangerous in Arab countries, in African countries. I mean, we see what happens in Nigeria, our great friend in Nigeria, and they just, every day, there's stories that come out of the terrible terrorism. So it's not just an American problem, but it's an ideology that is not going away anytime soon. And in my view, it's irrational because, of course, it's about us as a people, and I'll talk specifically about America now. It's just they hate us. Not all of them that live in places like the Middle East, but the radicals hate us, and it's just not going to go away. And the problem we had the day before 9/11 or on 9/11 was there were so many indicators of terrorists trying to do things when in reality people were not talking to each other, and when they did, and again I would highly encourage, if you haven't already, reading the 9/11 report, but all of the indicators were there, they just didn't get tied together because people weren't talking to each other, people weren't sharing. So what is it like today? And again, I didn't know this until I took DHS, but the cooperation between our own law enforcement and international law enforcement and intelligence professionals around the world, even though sometimes these countries aren't our friends, they cooperate with us because it's in their interest to cooperate with us. So how does it work today? Before I got to DHS, our intelligence community, playing the away game, started to hear chatter, and I say hear chatter in a lot of different ways: human intelligence, electronic intelligence. And the chatter is coming from Syria, and it's a cell in Syria that had started talking about how they had successfully built a bomb, and you may remember this because it was in the press, it was kind of a big deal, about how they were successful in building a bomb that would go into a laptop. And they tested it and tested it and tested it, and this was over a period of weeks and months, and they were convinced that based on the technology and the procedures in place in the world's airports back then, that it would not be detected. And we also learned from their discussions and over the internet and electronic discussions, human intelligence, that the device had to be, however, in the passenger compartment. If it was in the passenger compartment, it was detonated, it would take the plane down, without question. If it was in the cargo compartment, it wouldn't, because of the nature of how cargo is stored on airplanes. And again, you may remember it because I was, and we were meeting together, all of the intelligence people, the FBI were fantastic, to say the least. My own people at DHS were phenomenal, FAA and all of this. I almost, and it was in the press, that I was this close to preventing anyone from bringing a laptop into the passenger compartment. You may remember that. And the pushback we got from the airline industry was pretty considerable, and I understand their point of view. But I said, look, what's worse for airline business? Someone doesn't get to watch Netflix on their own computer in the passenger compartment, or they fall out of the sky over the Atlantic in a big flaming ball. And they go, good point. I mean, but the point is now, the intelligence community, that was the same men and women in many cases that were alive on 9/11 that weren't talking to each other, were now talking to each other. So when you get the chatter about building the bomb, it comes to the United States. It's digested not only by the intelligence people, but by the FBI counterterrorism. When we found out about it, DHS finds out about it, TSA immediately, the people that no one likes at the airport, they're much deeper and broader. That's not the only thing they do. So TSA, based on what we were hearing this bomb was like, went to their own labs and their own contract labs and made a device based on what the intel people were telling them, And they called me and said, they're right, we can't detect this thing. Very close to stop. So what do we do next? They start working with the bomb they've built and the people that are very good at this kind of thing, looking for a way to find it. I went in and briefed the president that I was about to make this decision, and then they came in. It was literally one of these things, door flies open, they run in, we got it. We worked out a way. We can stop it. And so CBP, Customs and Border Protection, they have about 4,000 people deployed at airports all around the world, and they observe how airports around the world do security and advise them on how to do security better. And frankly, if they don't do security properly, then they tell us in Washington, and we tell the country, okay, we're not going to allow airplanes from your airport to fly directly to the United States. And that's their incentive for doing better. But in any event, we came up with these new procedures, we disseminate them. Our CBP people were able to, in these various airports around the world, the last point of departure airports, saw the procedures put in place, and I never had to pull the trigger on that. Wouldn't have happened 18 years ago, but that's what happens now. It's not to say that someone might not be able to pull it off someday, but the fact that CBP working with law enforcement and police or intelligence organizations around the world maintain databases of names. I would get calls all the time from members of Congress about someone who was trying to come to the United States to go to a conference, and he might have been from the Middle East, and the accusation always seemed to be, well, your people are harassing him because he's Muslim, or he comes from a Muslim country, or because he's a man or woman of color. And I would check, and there's always a reason why. And I would call a member of Congress back and say, you don't have a need to know why that person's not going to come to the United States, but it's not just because of what they look like, or not just because of the fact that they're Muslim. There's something else there, and of course they demand to know, and I always took great pleasure in saying, I'm not going to tell you. That wouldn't have happened. That wouldn't have happened X number of years ago. When people are singled out at the airports coming into the United States for extra attention, is generally not random. It's because of databases, and it's because of their pattern of travel in the world. That CBP has access to look at it and say, he's been to the wrong places at the wrong times, and let's just go through his luggage real quick, that kind of thing. And I would close again, CBP has got an incredible command center in Northern Virginia. It rivals anything I've ever seen in the military. And they track people, and again, with these incredible database access they have, they track people around the world, people that maybe not even coming to the United States, buy a ticket in London to fly to Sydney. If they're in the database, CBP will get that hit and will notify the right people. But the other issue on smuggling and whatnot are containers. The estimate I've been told is about 400 million containers a year come to the United States. Many of them contain contraband of various types that terrorists could smuggle a nuclear weapon in, as an example. That's always a thought. The fact is that CBP, in their database, at their op center, follow a pretty good percentage of at-risk containers as they're loaded in one country, put on a ship, and the ship goes to various, and then it ends up coming to the United States. They're very, very effective at that. And again, something that would not have happened 18 years ago today is now done routinely. And more than anything else, and I'll close with this, more than anything else in terms of protecting our country, what we have is this tremendous collaboration between law enforcement, the intelligence community, both here in domestic intelligence as well as overseas intelligence, and the fact that we're plugged into so many countries and their police and their databases and their information that, again, I wouldn't never say never, but the threat against the United States is far better managed today than it was 18 years ago, and that was a terrible lesson that we had to learn. So with that, I think I will just say thanks so very much for what you do, particularly those in the audience. that have served the country in uniform in one capacity or another. Thank you for doing that. But for all of you, thanks for doing what you do, because the more effective you are at it, the less crime we have, the less chance of terrorist attack that we have. And I'm really proud to have stood up here today and told you a little bit about, I think, what is very important for every citizen to know, and that is people are on watch 24/7 to protect Americans. Sometimes that turns into a little bit of inconvenience at the airport, or a little bit of inconvenience in other places as we live our lives. But the fact is, a little bit of investment, a little bit of inconvenience, like not getting to watch your Netflix on your computer in the past, a little bit of inconvenience is not a bad thing. So thank you very much for what you do, and have a great night tonight dancing and doing all the rest of it with Rick Springfield, which I wish I could be with you. Thanks very much.
For these keen insights that you shared today. Please accept this gift of token. It's our Board of Directors Challenge Coin. I'm sure you've got a few of those that you can add it to, sir.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much again.